What's up, everybody? This is Anthony Cordova from Cordova Speed and Custom, and today we are doing a bass guitar. I'm not going to do a long introduction today. It's pretty self-explanatory. Here I'm just taking it apart, and I already pulled off the guitar strings, and now I am taking off the strap mounts. I decided to do it in my little studio / office to be on a soft surface. So here I'm taking the neck off. Make sure you save all the hardware, of course, you're going to want to save, and if you're going to have a hard time, putting this thing back together, which is pretty self-explanatory, you might want to keep everything kind of separate. I'm going to throw everything in a bag, as you'll see later. So I just keep like Ziplocs handy for stuff like this. Here I'm taking off the battery cover. This thing runs on a 9-volt battery for pickups and modulators and whatnot. Here I'm taking off the panel for the volume modulator and whatever else goes in the front, the knobs to adjust the sound, and all the wires. Here I am taking off the bridge, 6 little screws. You can do this with a Phillips screwdriver. Pretty much all I used on this was a Phillips screwdriver, some wire cutters. There are some wires you're going to have to cut and solder back together. So here I'm taking off the pickups. Just pick up the sound. These things do have wires that go through to the panel in the back. This thing had a pretty tight fit, so here I just got a little razor knife and pulled the cover off. Here I'm taking the panel off for all the wiring. Plugging the 9-volt battery. Here on the front where these knobs go through, they have some little retainer nuts on the outside. The thing was pretty loose already. But they do have a flathead screwdriver slot, so you can hold the knob while you take the little nuts off. Flipping it back over. So here, this is something I'd highly suggest if you don't know how these things go back together, especially the wiring. I am labeling all the wires that have to go through to come out. So basically I'm leaving everything kind of plugged together, and I kind of eyeballed where the knobs go, or I really kind of am mechanically inclined, so you kind of like know where stuff goes. But if you might want to draw a wire diagram if you've never done one of these before. So I'm labeling what goes where here and then cutting some wires. I didn't do a video of putting this thing back together. There are some good soldering videos out there if you want to go look for how to solder wires back together. So just make sure you label all the stuff, and I actually had to solder the wires back together and use shrink wrap or whatever for the wires as well. So here I'm just gathering all the little nuts and screws and parts, and I'm throwing them in the bag. So here we are taking off this stuff has some vinyl lettering. This is for a local band, Tex-Mex band, Texas Funk. Is for a friend of mine named Rob G, and we are removing the vinyl with a heat gun and a razor blade. And then I'll take a rag soaked in some, or towel soaked in like some adhesive remover or thinner or whatever and take the glue off. Here I'm burning my hand for no apparent reason. Dropping the towels. Just giving this thing a wipe down before I start sanding. You always want to kind of make sure there's no kind of contaminants on the panel before you start sanding, so wipe it down. So on this thing, where the pickup, this thing had been painted before. It had some chips on it, on the edges. You know, it's just from use or whatever. But around the area where the bridge was bolted or screwed down to, the paint was all wrinkled. So I'm taking some 180 and I am smoothing everything out, feathering all that paint back. This thing had some clear on it, so I'm going to go ahead and use some catalyzed primer on this, so give it a nice foundation for paint. Just going and giving the whole thing some 180 action there. Kind of going around and making sure everything's sanded by hand, getting in the crevices and all the creases and whatnot. You always want to make sure everything's nice and dull before you shoot, especially before you shoot any primer. That stuff it'll stick. But so here I put some screws in the where the mounts went for the straps, the strap mounts. I put some screws that I had laying around and wired it up hung it up. So here I got some solvent cleaner and I am wiping it down for getting it ready for primer. As you can see around the edges, this thing had some nice chips, so I went ahead and smoothed everything out. I'm gonna spray this thing with candy paint, so you want to make sure you have a nice foundation. I didn't use any putty on this thing. You don't want it. That stuff will kind of tend to want to shrink back. So just went ahead and feathered all the paint, feather edged all the paint. We are using pink primer for some reason. Oh, I ran out of gray, so I added some red to the mix. So this is the next day, and we are 320. There I'm showing you the 320. 320 with a DA sander. And then I will go over this thing with a 600 grit wet sand. So a bucket of water, towel, and some soap, basically. So this is called flat padding. You just kind of want to pick a uniform pattern and go around the thing. Try not to hit the edges too much. I'm just running it nice and flat over the surface. Smooth pattern, pattern or whatever. Just nice and flat. Don't hold the DA on the edge or whatever. So here I got a piece of 600, folding it 3 ways. It's a 9x11 sheets, cut in half, and then fold 3 ways. We use 3 sides. Bam, 3 sides. What? Got a little soap in there and some water. You can choose to guide coat this thing again if you want with for the 600 grit sanding. I'm pretty good at knowing how far or how much to sand, so I didn't do that on this. Again, I'm making sure I get all the edges nice and smooth. And the last step of prepping this thing for paint is a Scotch-Brite, a red Scotch-Brite. And I am just going and getting all the areas that I couldn't reach with sandpaper. And wiping it down again with some solvent prep. And the final step is a tack cloth, a cheesecloth, and blow every little crack, every hole. And so this color right here is actually just some leftover base that I had from another job, and I'm using that as a foundation coat. These candy paint, even the bases are really transparent, so you want to make sure that you pick up some type of a foundation coat for these custom jobs. That's what gives it their depth, is their transparency. So here I've put on a couple coats and I've let it dry, and this is 1000 grit. This is a solid color, so if you have a metallic, you want to actually sand it with some 2000 or 1500, but I'm just kind of giving it a once over, knocking down any specks of dirt or anything that could have landed on while I started painting. Kind of a little trick that I learned from one of my mentors. So in between coats, just hit it with a little sandpaper. So here is the base color we are using. It is Sapphire Blue from House of Color. Getting all the edges. So this makes it a lot easier. Instead of trying to cover this thing, these metallics are almost pure metallic with some pigment, but so yeah, they're transparent. So here is the first coat of candy paint, and I am using some inner coat clear with some intensifier in it. When you do these candies, on these especially, it's nice to use a color that's kind of similar to the color you're going to paint. For this color, I am using Candy Burple from House of Color. Like Burple, like purple and blue mixed together, Burple. So nice even coats. Candy, you always want to make sure your coats are at least 50% overlap. Start light and get heavier with every coat. So that was the actual candy with some metal flake, some micro mini flake, I guess you could say. You see me dump in there. Now this is just straight candy. So I'm covering the transparent flake, or the flake actually, with just candy. What candy is it is a base coat and a transparent color coat over the top, so it gives it the depth. So whatever color you paint the base is going to change the color on the outside. So now that is clear. I think I got 2 or 3 or 4 coats of candy over this thing. And the slow-mo action shot with a little metallic sparkling. You see the metallic there. This customer actually wanted some scroll pinstriping on this thing, so I'll give it a shot. I used Peacock Blue one shot with some hardener. Make sure if you're going to clear over this stuff or paint over it, you use hardener from your clear in the one shot with the one shot thinner. I'm just kind of gliding my hand over the top of the panel, guiding it, my left hand, and then using my right hand to paint. So here's a little trick I learned from a friend of mine, just a little some white pearl highlights over the top, kind of giving it like a highlighted effect on the accent colors. And I use the white for the accent colors. Now on this part here, I'm just actually I am using the same Candy Burple to coat the pinstriping, and I'm just kind of going around and just fogging it on the pinstriping. And I put about 3 or 4 coats of this stuff on, kind of giving it a ghosted effect. Here's one of the, I think this is the last coat, and so I'm letting this stuff dry about 5 minutes in between coats. So yeah, just kind of giving it a ghosted effect, and then the candy will also kind of give it a shadow with the airbrush. So now I am shooting the first coat of clear on. When you're doing like custom work like this and you have some pinstriping or some kind of double layered paint effect going on, you always want to put a really light coat of clear first over the graphics or pinstriping or whatever. If you really like pound it on, it could want to like wrinkle or affect the paint in an adverse kind of way. So the second coat, I'm really testing in an inconspicuous spot for you want this thing in between coats. You want it to be sticky or tacky but not stringy, if that makes any sense. So this is a finished product, just clear. I still got to polish this thing. So here I am giving it, I am sanding it with 1200 grit sandpaper and 2000. So first I'll go over it with 1200 with a block, with a soft block, what they call a soft block. And I'm staying off the edges, kind of just going, I'm going to the edge but not over the edge, if that makes any sense. You don't want to really be rubbing on the edges of this, especially you did all this work with the candy and everything. You don't want to burn through the clear. So here I've got a mini polisher and I am using a cutting pad first, a foam cutting pad, and I am polishing. I'll give it about 3 or 4 passes of the foam, the cutting pad with some compound on it. That's the compound / polish. It's a one-step deal with this. I think it's Norton Ice or something like that. So here I've got some the polishing pad now. It's starting to look good, like some glass. So the last step is take a little detail brush. This is just an old paint brush that was cleaned up, or I never used for painting. I just taped up and use it as a detail brush. So that's it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment and let me know any videos you'd like to see. And don't forget to hit the notification bell. Thank you for watching.